Hello, welcome back to the Structural Engineering Podcast. When we think about first responders, we usually picture firefighters, paramedics, and law enforcement. But during or after a major incident, whether it's a collapse, an explosion, a vehicle impact, or a natural disaster, structural engineers are often called in almost immediately. This week, we are talking about first responding as a structural engineer. What happens when you're asked to evaluate a damaged structure under time pressure? How do you balance life safety, incomplete information, and professional responsibility? And how do you become a first responder as a structural engineer? We'll dig into the real-world scenarios, decision-making in uncertain conditions, coordination with emergency personnel, and the ethical and technical challenges that come with being one of the first professionals on site. If you've ever wondered what it really means to be a first responder in our profession, or how people prepare for it, this episode is for you.
The Structural Engineering Podcast.
Appreciate you guys having me and Scott on. I appreciate Scott for the invite to come join you all. I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, my name's Mike Riccitiello. I'm out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I have my beautiful wife, Katie. I have four kids, 3 older boys, and my youngest is a girl, my little daughter. We are part owners. I'm the president of a small structural firm called Atlas Engineering here in Raleigh. And the company's been here for a long time, over 25 years, and I've only been there for about the last 6. Before that, I was with a large multinationals that's changed names 14 times, engineering firm. Before that, I was active duty Army. And so my background's a little different. And I'm actually, I probably should have told you guys this beforehand. I'm technically a degreed civil. Hopefully that's okay on a structural.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the in a nutshell for me.
It was school after the Army?
So I got my undergrad degree from West Point. That's how I got my civil engineering degree. And so I was kind of already in at that point and owed them a few years for it on the backside. That's how I got into the active side, was through my education.
Great. Well, we're excited to have you here. We also have Scott Colllins. Scott, do you mind giving an introduction of yourself?
I'm graduated in school back in '99, so I've been around for a few more years than the rest of you. But I own a structural engineering firm in Durham, North Carolina. So we do multifamily, we do mixed use, we do crazy Mr. Beast projects, we do disaster recovery as a company. But I've been doing the business for over 16 years now. So been around for a while. What else you guys want to know? Go see the last episode. I talk more.
Scott's right, and you should check out his first episode 85, Long Spans and Short Timelines. This is about doing Mr. Beast episodes. Scott is the engineer for Mr. Beast and has taken part in a lot of the really cool structures that he's done and his sort of workshops. So I'll put a link to that one actually in the show notes.
No, I think that's great. And today, we're talking about being a first responder as a structural engineer. And I think this is going to be eye-opening to many structural engineers. And as I dove into researching it, it continuously expanded my thoughts of what it meant. So I'm excited to have this conversation and discussion today. So to start us off, how did you first get involved in first response or rapid assessment work as a structural engineer?
Again, so we're going to have, and this is probably good, we're going to have very different answers for a lot of the stuff, Scott and I, especially on how we got into the rescue, the USAR side. So I came at it, again, I was active duty Army, and I came at it. There's a specific unit there's not very many, but specific one out of Fort Belvoir, Virginia, that does urban search and rescue. And I was a degreed engineer officer. And I'd actually had my PE license by the time I got there, which wasn't a requirement. But what it allowed me to do is I went to a bunch of training while there, right? And learned a lot about the rescue side. I was more directing rescue efforts on the Army side. But one of the trainings I went to was structures specialist, is the course that I'm sure we can get into later when we talk about specific training. But it's a FEMA guideline course, but it's actually taught by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it was one of the trainings I went to in the Army. And because I was a degreed engineer with a license, it allowed me to actually become certified structure specialist. And that's the technical term for what we do in the USAR world, is a structures specialist. It's an STS. And so that was my in, was I got exposed to the whole rescue world in the military, but specifically went to that one course, and that certified me to be an engineer in the rescue realm. I got off active duty. I'm still in the reserves, but it'll, by just having that baseline, it allowed me to continue to do, even after I got out of the active side, it allowed me to do stuff for FEMA and the federal side, and then the state of North Carolina, which I'm sure Scott can get into. We both do that for the state, but it was that sort of first entry point that got me involved.
Is this stability and like failure sort of, or is this material based? Because everything really will fail. Like steel versus masonry fail very differently. And so is the classwork that you were looking at more about the failure of all these materials or material specific?
Honestly, it's really about disaster work, right? It's less, they sort of assume if you're a degreed engineer with a PE license that you've got a basic understanding of, mechanics of materials, and you've had, your standard statics, you're a practicing engineer, right? Like, you understand, and they don't just take structural engineers too, right? So we know geotech folks who can go to this route. We know, I was civil, right? So they sort of check all of that and say, look, here's what you need to understand from a disaster standpoint, right? So it's a little bit more about, hey, this is how you operate in a disaster area. Here's some common practices that you do when you're on one of these teams. This is how you support the team from the engineer's perspective. Here's how you stay safe. Here's how you keep them safe. Here's some case studies where we talk about, how to think outside the box, right? So it's a little bit of a different style of coursework. And that's why, because you're a licensed engineer, they just assume a lot of that stuff. You've got that background.
Mental. Okay, then I was trying to attach it to an engineering class, but it is a totally, you have to know the engineering material, but it is your side of this.
And if it helps, the military sent non-engineers to this course. Firefighters, some of the rescue folks, they can go as well, right? So there are folks who can go and learn a lot and take a lot from this course. The engineers just have a much different background when they take it.
Okay. What kind of events typically trigger a call for an engineer to respond? So, like, I know a lot of people can be on the call system, but for what sort of calls are you often the first call?
So there's going to be multiple triggers to a call. So there's federal level, there's state level. You can have a single incident where we're going to say like a building collapse, or a building is the question. Or we can have a wide area incident, which is a hurricane, an earthquake, stuff like that. So you have two different worlds that you're going to be playing. And I was deployed in Charlotte's 23 fire. That was a big 5-story podium that damaged the PT-10 as the firefighters were just panicking because all of a sudden they started hearing shotguns going off and had no clue why the building sounded like shotguns were shooting at them. So that was what triggered the call, is that the captain on the site, like, buildings aren't supposed to do that. And so he called up the chain and said, I need an engineer. And they get the first two engineers that were available. One of them knows me, called me, and now suddenly I'm helping supporting them from a distance. And then about 8 hours later, we switched who's there, and I went down the site, and Nick came off the site. So we do a lot of back and forth because, Mike's been on the calls. I've been on the calls. We've been back and forth with calls. So we, as a group in the state level, there's 20 of us, and we all have each other's numbers, and we pretty much know where everyone's specialties kind of lie. If I need a bridge, I'm calling Cheryl Lynn or one of the other people. If I need, a multifamily building, besides myself, I'm trying calling a couple of other, like Klaus or a couple of others. So we have a lot of different people that can do a lot of different project types, so we know who's doing what. We had an earth and dam project, so I'm calling our geotechnical guys. We have Donnie, and I don't really know the new guy yet, but the new guy can help us deal with dams, earth and dams failing. And we were like, I'm standing on a dam. I probably shouldn't be, but what am I looking at? Yeah. So
I think the only thing Scott touched on something. I think the piece is when an event happens, a lot of times the local responders, the local fire departments, the local government, whether it's state or local, when that's overwhelmed, right? When you have an event that they can't handle, and that could be because it's so big, it's so widespread, or it's so catastrophic, like the Surfside collapse in Florida, right? Or it's a hurricane, right? So you're talking levels of events that a local response can't handle, right? And so we can typically get the call for those, whether it's the state of North Carolina needing us as part of their teams, or it's the federal level where, hey, maybe this is a national response and responding to a hurricane. The engineers we're just part of that effort, right? And honestly, we're a small part. Like, we're not, Scott and I are not pulling folks out of the rubble, right? We're there for the rescuers to make sure that they're safe. That hey, they have questions about. Scott mentioned that fire captain knew something was wrong, and he knew it with the building. Please get me somebody who knows what's going on here, right? So it's they have questions they can't answer. That's when we get the call.
You know better than anyone. One tiny miscalculation can become a huge problem. That's why having the right business insurance matters. Next Insurance is built for structural engineers and small firms and is trusted by over 750,000 small businesses nationwide. You can get tailored professional liability and general liability coverage online in minutes. No endless phone calls or paperwork. Plans start as low as $29 a month, and if you need a certificate of insurance for a new project, you can download it instantly from your phone. Protect your practice so you can focus on building what lasts. Go to nextinsurance.com/SE podcast and get a free quote today.
Trying to paint the picture in my head a little bit, how often are you getting a call, and what are the most common issues that you're seeing? Like a building collapse clearly is way out there, but like fire damage, popping a PT slab, that sounds very common, but is that like there aren't that many fires of that size? What is the typical call that you get and frequency of this?
I've been doing it for almost 10 years, and I think I've been almost 7 calls, 7 different types of calls, whether it be, the other thing that we do add as a state asset is when our state teams, other specialty groups such as our state explosives group, the fire and arms group for the state level, had a silo explosion. And they're like, well, I'm not going to go put my head into a silo to see what's going on without somebody telling me it's okay. So we get called up and say, hey, get an engineer out here. They have, the engineers that see what's available, and you go out to look at and try to keep that person who's trying to figure out why the explosion happened or why did this collapse. Sometimes it's passive type stuff where we're just going out there to keep them safe or not. Other reasons we're trying to figure out how to, one of our team members had to redirect the Cape Fear River in about 4 hours. So it was a serious, question on how to do. And we're asked sometimes to do it because the local fire departments, the local people in charge are like, we're out of ideas. How do we get this solved?
To Scott's point, it's not very often. Sure, we're technically on call right now, but you know what I mean? Like, this is not like a fire department. We're not getting 5-alarm fires, a couple times a month. We go out. On average, you might get one a year, maybe one every other year. That carries its own level of how do you keep folks like this interested when you don't get a call very often, right? So there's a lot to unpack there, but it's not a lot. Now you can go years, unlucky years where there's 3 hurricanes and an earthquake and something else happens, right? And you go out the door more than you ever thought you would, right? So it's wholly up to the level of the disaster, how, whether larger assets are needed. In our case with the state, sometimes they'll call us for much smaller events where they don't need a team of rescuers. They just need a structural engineer, right? So, we'll tend to get more calls for the local stuff that's not quite so big, but it does kind of run the gamut.
I almost feel relieved to hear that. Like, that's probably a really good thing in the United States. We don't have that many challenges.
We don't want to go.
Yeah.
Right? Like that
Right.
means something bad's happened.
Yeah, it's good we have people in reserve to do those things, but you don't want it to happen. So when you get that call for that incident, Like, what information are you trying to gather before you leave the office, your house, the middle of the night? What does that look like typically?
So on the state level, we get the call from North Carolina Emergency Management. The head cheeses calls somebody in our group. Usually it has been Mike as designated as first caller. Sometimes it's somebody else, and they figure out who's then available. We have a shared calendar, and if you're out in Europe for 3 weeks, obviously you're not going to be able to respond to a call. If you're sitting around in Raleigh and the fires or whatever's going on is in Durham, guess what? You're probably first choice if you're available. So you get that call, and what usually happens is we have like 3 people initiated. One person's doing the legwork, trying to gather up Google images or whatever's going on if they can. And then the other 2 are making their way to the site to figure it out. And then we in constant call contact with everybody saying, okay, there's been times where Nick or Mike have been feeding me information as I'm driving, like, well, the engineer of record for this building was so and so, and I'm like, I really don't care, but great, got it. So you're kind of going down through some of the stuff, and you're like, okay, we went way too far than I needed to know, but at least I have it if I need it, because you're still showing up. When you get there, you report to usually a captain, and the captain's kind of like, okay, I need you to blah, and that may not have been what the guy in the North Carolina Emergency Management Office in Raleigh heard on the phone when he called us. But when we get there, we get a very clear picture.
That is cool. That's really nice that you are building the story as you're going to the site. Someone is looking at how this building was constructed, the building type. There's so many pieces. What is the biggest unknown when you're going onto the site as a first responder?
The biggest thing is usually how involved is it? What am I walking into? One of the first things they teach us in SDS school is to do a 360 around the building. It's like, yes, it takes 5 minutes to walk around the building, but you don't know what you're looking at. You don't understand what the issue is until you can get that 360 look at what's going on. Is there something that are going to fall on you? Is there something that the firefighters aren't seeing that they need to be at least flagged? One of our guys was on a fire. That was a big fire with an unreinforced masonry building, and he was doing his 360, saw a couple of firefighters taking smoke break, and they were standing by the wall, and he's like casually just said, "Hey guys, that's a very big wall, and its fire was burning just a few minutes ago there. Why don't you go take your break by the tree and not by the building?" He turns the corner, and the wall falls. He runs back, expecting to find firefighters buried underneath masonry, and they're over there by the tree saying, "Damn, that thing fell fast." And he's like, "You listened." So he's just like, the simplest thing sometimes could be the biggest impact that you never know. So it's stuff that we're going around looking at a building. The first thing we need to do is find out, what are we getting involved in? Can I walk around the building? Is it something I can see?
Just trying to paint the biggest picture you can and then zoom into the issues.
Right. Now, the only thing I would say, just because there's a lot of different types of responses you might have, the one that we actually tend to get the most is a hurricane, just because you have plenty of warning. You know where it's going. Maybe you don't know until it's 48 hours out, but you still, you can muster up all the resources. You don't know what you're walking into, right? You get the call. You're gonna be supporting by pre-staging with a rescue team, in Wilmington, or if for me it's a FEMA team, we're gonna muster in Virginia and drive down to Orlando and be in Orlando when the storm hits, and then just wait for orders from there, right? So there is an element of, while it's great when we know exactly what we're walking into, like Scott said, and hey, look, I know this building, I can get the plans for it. There are times when you don't. There are times when you're just there, and who knows what the damage is going to be afterward, and you sort of have to do it on the fly. And that's where Scott's point about, they teach you what to do when you come up on the scene and you do your 360 and you interact with the other rescuers. You're gathering all this information. It's all very logical and makes sense. It's just, there's a methodical way to do it, and you can try to make some order out of that chaos, but there are times when you really have no idea what you're walking into.
Yeah, when I went to Laurinburg for Hurricane Florence, we basically started driving south. And as we got into Laurinburg, it became an island. And the first thing they had to do is 9 o'clock at night, the hurricane's coming in. They're like, "We need a place to put 80 people." And you're like, Okay, well, the school that's about to go underwater is a bad choice. It's like, what's your next option? So they start asking you about this building and that building, and you're like literally in the middle of the rain trying to figure out where do you put 80 people inside a town that is becoming an island.
My gosh.
So when you're going on these, like you said, maybe you're in Orlando preparing and waiting, and you're going to go to a site that's unknown or a building that's unknown. What risks are you guys taking? You talk through a 360. Are you staying outside the building, or is there occurrences where you went into the building even with the firefighters, or are like what level of risk do you guys take or need to, or often is assumed you're going to take to help solve the problem?
Well, the first and foremost mission as an engineer is to protect the firefighters. We're adding aid and intelligence to the firefighters, that expertise that they don't have day to day.
Yeah.
So yes, we're never going to tell a fire. We have no authority, nor will we ever tell a firefighter, you can't go in, especially if there's a person at risk in the building. The firefighters are going in. So the question isn't to stop them. The question is how to help them go in the safest possible way. Is it breaching the load-bearing wall or breaching the non-load-bearing wall? Well, as an engineer, you kind of can tell which way is which and tell them, hey, that wall you go through, that's easier to get through than that one over there. And yes, we will go, at least our team will go in with the firefighters, and they learn quickly that you're there looking around, making sure no, widowmakers overhead crush them or anything like that. And they're there making sure that you're a novice, you have no clue what a fire is going to do to you. So we're going to keep you safe from the fire aspect, and you're going to keep us safe from the building aspect. So we're working in tandem when we go in with them. When I went in at the fire down in Charlotte Fire, they were still putting the fire out, and they still had water coming in from the upper levels as we're sloshing through the podium deck levels, the 2-level podium decks.
Are you wearing the bunker gear, the oxygen
No,
respirator, or are
we
you
don't.
wearing your pocket protector going in
That
behind the
sounds
guys?
like a very strong pocket protector, stainless actually.
And you got your slide rule, and you're pointing at stuff, and these guys are covered.
You spin the propeller on the top of your
Yeah.
helmet, and you tell them, "Look, I'm here. I got you guys."
Yes. Typically, we do not wear turnout gear. Although I say that, but a couple of our guys, Tom and Lee, wore full hazmat suits crawling through the building with the first responders. So it will not be uncommon to say, well, you're our STS, and we need you on a boat to go up the river to look at a bridge that was underwater about 20 minutes ago to see if it's still safe. So you're now a Swiftwater guy. Hop on the boat. Enjoy. And you're like, well, I don't think my training included Swiftwater rescue, so hopefully you guys can keep me safe as I keep you safe.
Yeah, no, Scott hit it on the head. We go in. We don't take any risks, more risks than the rest of the rescuers, right? I mean, and to Scott's point, we trust them, and they most of them are doing this on a day-to-day basis. Maybe not to that extreme level, but that this is their world, and so we put our faith and trust in them. Just like when they ask us, "Can I cut this?" and I say yes, they put their faith in me, right? And so we absolutely go in with them. We're not taking any more risks than they are, but it is risky, right? I mean, that's it's a disaster scene, and Scott hit it right on the head again about you're not going to tell them no, they're going to go in. So either they're going to do it with you and your help, or without, and I would rather them do it with my help, because I think there's a better chance that they're all coming out.
What type of training, if any, did you guys get on being able to make that decision and how to, safety protocols or how to stay safe? I mean, as engineers, we have maybe, let's say, intuition, or from we can observe what's happening and come up with a good idea. But what kind of protocols, I guess, have you guys been trained on?
Yeah, I talked about the STS course. There's actually two. There's a beginner and then an advanced. They're both a week long. It's full immersion. You go out to California, and they've got a site out there. They teach these courses typically once a year for each, and these folks have been teaching this course. I mean, they have instructors there that were involved in September 11th, Oklahoma City, right? So it's they've been involved from the get-go, and so these are well-seasoned, very experienced. And they're experienced as STSs, but they're also experienced in taking, your run-of-the-mill office engineer and turning them into someone who can go into a disaster risk site. So yes, there are steps you can take. Um, they walk you through. They teach you some of the techniques. A lot of it is how to go in, how to keep calm. If you've ever used a GPS system, if you've ever used data gathering like this. They teach you how to work with a crane, right? Because sometimes you need, engineers can understand weights and centers of gravity, but you've never actually worked with a 20-ton crane before, right? So, they walk you through all that, and so, at the end of probably both of those, it's a multi-year process. At the end, you're trained, maybe not ready, right? Like you're trained, and now is the experience part, right? Like you just guess what? You just got to go out the door, and you got to see it, and you got to learn it, and you got to experience it, and we all come back, and we as a group, we tend to gather once or twice a year and talk about, hey, Scott, you went on that, back last summer. Tell us let's help us learn what you learned, what you saw, because not all of us got to go, right? So tell us what you learned, and maybe that will help us, in the future, right? So you kind of you put all that together and hope that you know what you're doing when you get out there.
I can imagine there's a lot of firsthand here. Like you can't put every example in a textbook.
Yeah.
Because I keep falling back to that, but it's like communicating what experience you've had and then across the board can be really helpful, I imagine.
And Scott, you might have missed it, but Scott said something when he talked about sending people out. We try to go in pairs, right? Like, we try not to send a guy out by himself, right? So, or a girl. So a lot of times what we do the best we can is you pair an experience with a new STS, right? So that you've got somebody to lean on. Hey, this is what I see. Let me show you the ropes, right? So it's and even the rescue side can understand, hey, you might get some gentle teasing that, oh, I got the new guy, but right, they understand. And they want you to succeed as well. So
My guys always say I got the cool engineer.
Sure,
I don't think
sure.
that's an oxymoron, I know, but yeah, that's what they say.
I'm curious, maybe I should ask sooner. So we brought up hurricanes, I'm guessing tornadoes, fires, building collapses. What other type of scenarios do you guys find yourselves in, or from a national level, maybe trained about or discussed?
We actually had a state group go down to Puerto Rico after the earthquakes. So we had 5 or 6. Mike, were you one of them?
I was not.
Okay, so we actually had about 5 or 6 of our guys, people down there in Puerto Rico with aftershocks going on, and doing building assessments and wide area searches. And one of them walked a building on 3 sites, like, it looks great, and they looked at the 4th site and said, oh, there's a big boulder through the ice. so he's like, that wasn't expected because the other 3 sides look great. So it's definitely, we've gotten, our little state team has gotten farmed out to other states and territories because we have more than most states do. We've been we got Alaska earthquake. Nick went to Alaska earthquake, Puerto Rico. Some went down to Louisiana. We tend to stay in our own little corner of North Carolina, but we have been farmed out.
The only other one that I might, again, it's anything that overwhelms, right? So, Helene, Scott and I both of us went in the aftermath for Helene, right? But that was a hurricane, but it really was a flooding event, right? It was a massive flooding event, and at least in the western part of North Carolina, right? And so we've also been deployed where you have storms that cause flash flooding. Obviously none of us went, but think about the recent stuff that happened in Texas not too long ago, right? Where they had that flash flood event. So those tend to be, along with the ones that you've mentioned. September 11th was a terrorist event. So, any sort of either no notice or in our case of a hurricane, a notice disaster that just requires expert level beyond the local response.
I wonder, so I think in our normal engineering practice, This is way down the line, but public safety is the priority of a building that stands strong. Are there any legal or ethical considerations when you that are often overlooked during an emergency response, or anything that's a part of the response that we wouldn't think about?
It comes up a lot. I'll be honest. We've been doing recruiting, right? Trying to get people to come join this crazy crew. They ask, "Hey, what about my license? What about the liability?" And it's a difficult topic, right? We've gone to the North Carolina board. There have been a lot of discussions. It's difficult, and I understand why it's difficult for a board to say, yeah, sure, anything you do out there is fine, right, under a disaster scenario. I think liability in a disaster site is in the case of our group, you sort of have to set it aside. Not that you're going to do anything negligent, not that you're going to do anything. I mean, you're there for the public safety. So it's sort of like, if public safety is paramount, then I'm going to do whatever I can. I'm going to make the judgment call with the information I had on on hand at the moment. And it's not always going to be the right call. And I think you kind of have to accept that, because it's not going to be cut and dry. And I think what I sort of hang my head on is all right, well, the first time an engineer is brought to the table for something they did in a disaster scenario, that's gonna take this whole system down. I mean, how can you expect engineers to go in and do this and still worry about their license, right?
Yeah.
So now some do, and I don't blame them for that. But you sort of kind of have to accept that you're going to be doing things that you didn't think you'd be doing, when you got your license.
And I would think a board would say, is it obvious negligence, right? Like, if you're trying your best and you give your best opinion, I would think most people would see that as doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
The other small umbrella, if you will, is as a state asset, we actually become state employees. So when we get deployed, we now become state employees. So we're under the state insurance. My insurance company would probably be flipping out if I was doing this as Scott Colllins and Colllins Structural Engineer. I mean, I wouldn't imagine what I probably couldn't afford my liability insurance. But as I become a state employee to do this, I am now under the state umbrella. And I'm not going to say we can do no wrong, but at least we have a big giant state helping us.
That's a great point. It's the same with the feds, with FEMA. When I deploy with FEMA, it's the same way. I become at that point a federal employee for the temporary appointed amount.
North Carolina did also pass a Good Samaritan rule for secondary responders, which there are several programs out there, but Sears is one of the ones that we recognize in North Carolina, which is the Structural Engineering SEA's group of secondary responders that we can be volunteers to help the building departments reassess properties after the disaster. So your first tier responders in like a hurricane will be literally there as a hurricane comes through, and then right out the door as their storm passes. So our swiftwater teams, our rescue people, storms 5 minutes behind us and they're out the door. Secondary responders is like, okay, the first responders have rescued everybody. People's kind of calmed down. The area is, quote, stabilized a little bit. Secondary responders can start assessing properties that are not being rescued or actively in danger. And then you get the reconstruction phase, which our company does a lot of after the fact, of putting things back together for people's lives in a safer world.
Could you guys each walk us through a real example of a structure that in a call that you went on? Mike, would you start us off?
Sure. I'd gone on a few state calls. My first one with the federal team was Surfside, was the condo collapse in Florida. And, we got the call. We all knew what had happened, right? I mean, it was national news, but when you're an engineer, right, like you pay particular attention to a 13-story condo that just decides to go down. Right. So we all kind of knew that it had happened. And about 48, 72 hours later, sort of the call had gone out from the locals, hey, we need support. And to their credit, the first thing they asked for were engineers. So 4 of us from Virginia kind of jumped in, and we went down there as just engineers. So we actually went ahead of some of the teams, because that was what was first asked for, was, hey, we've got some teams down here, but we really need more engineers. So they brought in a bunch of engineers at the federal level. And so a couple of us were on ground, 3-4 days after the event. And because I wasn't with my team, Virginia Task Force 2, I fell in and essentially became an add-on to the Florida teams. So I was with one of the Florida FEMA teams that was on the ground, and they just needed more engineer help. They had a lot of rescuers on on site at the time, and they were doing 12 hours on, 12 hours off shifts already. So we really just fell in right with them, and I had spent 9 days there with them. A lot before a lot of people rotated in and out, and they brought a lot more teams in after that. So that was quite an event. I mean, it was a 13-story collapse, and when we got there, it was all mostly rubble except for the standing structure, and so there was a lot of questions about the standing structure. I mean, we could do an entire. There are podcasts about this topic, right? So, that was my first major disaster scene.
That's a serious one to start on, also.
Yeah.
Just to throw that out there.
And, welcome to the team.
What tools or equipment do you typically bring with you? I assume you're not walking with a little hammer. But what is your go-to kit of analysis tools you might need?
And Max, before that, I want Scott to tell us about.
If you want Scott to jump in on his event.
His event as
So
well.
One of my biggest single structure events is probably the Charlotte fire. So as the fire, it was under construction. It was 5 stories of wood already standing. They were starting to put the drywall system in. The fire sprinkler system was not engaged yet. The fire happened. 12 people were on the roof. The crane operator was able to rescue 10 of them with the stair stringers, because stairs on the crane, and got 10 of them off. 2 lost sight of the crane and perished in the fire. They called the first engineers a few hours after starting, because they were worried about the crane being in the fire, because it was actually getting heat coming off of it. So the first 2 engineers were on site. They started hearing shotguns go off. Both engineers that were first responded were not multifamily guys. They'd never done multifamily type structures as a regular practice, so they knew that would burn, but they weren't really sure what was going on with concrete. So after many phone calls, they decided that they were going to switch out engineers for the 7 a.m. shift. And instead of having the first 2 come off and the second 2, with me and Colby coming on at 7 a.m. the next day, which they were still spraying water on it. They didn't know where the victims were. We called the engineer rep because we got his drawings, and probably gave him the shock of his life first thing in the morning, saying, hey, I need to know what your compressive strengths were last time you broke. And did you put mild reinforcement in your slabs, and what size and type? Because we don't have enough of your drawings to get that answer. So he obviously gave us everything we wanted. It's like, well, you want the elements wall? You want this? And I'm like, I'm sitting on the site. I have no FEM capability right now. I don't want it. I want simple questions answered. So just answer questions. And so he gave us a bunch of information. We're like, okay, we now feel comfortable after walking on a site. I know you're still literally putting out fire, but you still see the smoke, you still see the water cans, but we need to go in. So we had our steel-toed boots on, and the side joke is that every time I get deployed, I get something in my boots, whether it's water or corn or something. So I have 2 pairs of boots now, but I'm sloshing through water, past the tops of my boots, because the water's running down the thing, running down the building through every which way. We turn the first corner, and there's PT tendons hanging down like spaghetti wires. Rebars is looping 12 inches down. So we just had the ground literally looked like a riverbed. So much in stone and aggregate has fallen off that the ground was covered with aggregate, and it looked like a river with water coming down it and everything. So the fire chief immediately is like, oh crap, we're never going to get people on this slab to recover those 2 bodies. And I said, well, wait, this is a 2-level podium. There's no level. And the fire chief kind of looked at us like, what do you mean there's a second level? Like, yeah, there's a second level of drawings. We saw the drawings. This is a speed ramp where you can go up 1 more level and see the next level up and slab. And so we go up the ramp, we turn around the corner, come back, and we start. As we start approaching the second speed ramp, I said, "Okay, everybody to the left by the cement wall." And the fire chief's looking at me like, "Why?" He goes, "We're walking on what we just saw." He's like, "Everybody to the left." So there's about 6 of us, and we all started walking the masonry wall right by the edge. We're at a high. We're not going to shear this much concrete with just 5 people. We're walking single file up it. We look at the slab above. We're like, well, the heat seemed to direct out the speed ramp and out the doors, out the side of the building, and it saved the slab above. So the main slab that we're going to be working on was fine. So we're like, okay, we can get on the top slab. So we exited the building. As we come back up to start talking to the team that's going to search for the bodies, I said, "Hey, Kevin, by the way, there's a swimming pool right there." He goes, "Where?" I said, "You see where the lift is all burnt and mangled?" He's like, "Yeah, it's half in the pool." He goes, "It's about a 5-foot deep pool there, covered in debris and who knows what else." And the fire chief looked at me. He's like, "I would have never saw that. We would have had a guy fall through debris-filled water, and it would have been a mess if it was just a mess." So while we were inside, they managed to locate where the bodies were from some expert. And so at that point, we were just sitting monitoring the building, making sure the leftover wings and the masonry stair shafts weren't going to move anywhere. So we were backup support at that point. Fire chiefs got what they needed. They built a temporary bridge across from the parking garage to the structure. We recovered the 2 bodies and then came back across. And then we were asked, all bystanders, and OSHA was there, this person was there, and that person there. I want to get on site. And we're like, we're engineers from the fire department right now. So if you want an engineer, either get your own or you try calling North Carolina Emergency Management to get us to work for you. But right now, we're here strictly for the firefighters. So we ended up playing the role of just firefighter assistants after we got them squared away to get on the slab.
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad that we skipped my question because that was a good story. Well, then let's go back to this question that I timed poorly. What do you bring? Yeah, it feels so different. What do you bring with you? Well, the question stays the same.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start, Scott. So he I think through some of these we've mentioned a few things. A lot of it's just your standard issued PPE. You gotta be safe, right? So you got to keep yourself safe. You're walking around in and on top and around some pretty rough stuff. As far as tools, though, it's a little dependent on. I mean, you can kind of bring whatever you want, but we try to pack light, right? Like you're gonna have bags, and you can bring a lot of stuff if you need to. But when it's really just you and the rescue teams, and you're either doing what Scott talked about, just kind of going in and observing, or it might be in a hurricane where you're pounding the streets, going neighborhood to neighborhood, right? So you got to kind of keep it light. And so, you might have binoculars, you might have a distance meter, you might have, if you're lucky and there's reception, we've got iPads, right? So you can pull down overhead imagery if you need to. There's small things that you can bring out with you, but it's a lot of it is just your ability to get in and around, and as always, you'd be smart to bring something to take notes with and sketch something up and make a quick drawing if you need to, right? So there's not a whole lot of required gear. It's a lot of what everybody thinks and after experience what you've used in the past. I don't know, Scott, if you bring anything else with you when you're out.
My bag's not TSA friendly, so I have a lot of stuff I would love to have that I can't because I go through flights too much. But the other thing that we didn't discuss is that's what we carry like on our vehicles in our person. What we have at our disposal for an instant call or quick call is we have like total stations, we have laser levels, we have digital levels, we can monitor structures, we have squawk boxes, which are like, was it 6-axis accelerators or 3-axis accelerators that we can mount to structures to see how things can move or wiggle. So we have what we carry in our truck or our car is part of it. What we can carry on the fire trucks and the semis is a whole nother pile of stuff and toys.
One thing, as you guys told these stories and things, like I think would be good to discuss is like, I could often see as an engineer that someone would call me and say, hey, we could just use some help if you come out here. We got the fire department. We just want to know what you think. What level of risk do you guys think that that would be to take without the training you guys have? Like what would you want other structural engineers to know about the risks they might be taking without the specific training you guys have done?
I think based on some of the stories I've heard, non-response engineers can actually cause mayhem in the fact that they're like too conservative and they're saying firefighters, you can't go do whatever. And so firefighters want to get in there to help. And if you're conservative and you're a non-trained engineer to go into disasters, you're going to want to see a mess. And you're like, I can't even start processing how to even get into that mess, let alone do it reasonably safely. Where if you're trained and experienced, you're bringing a little bit different eye and you're like, okay, firefighters want to get in here. They're willing to take the risk. Where can we get the safest? How can we get the safest? So that risk assessment and risk rewards is a hard thing for you to get out of and you're comfortable living. I'm doing it in clean design where my risk to rewards is like I have zero risk to all the rewards, where in a disaster site, you may be like, well, I have a huge risk with a small chance of rescuing somebody. That's a different world altogether. And it's hard for engineers to recognize that is a comfort zone that you're not allowed to have in the aspect of rescuing somebody. You got to be with the firefighters, recognizing that's the priority.
I would go further and say, don't go. You're not trained. It can be dangerous, right? And to Scott's point, you could make the situation worse. I wouldn't recommend that anyone. Now, obviously, it's public safety. You're there to do public good, right? So I mean, we're all gonna jump in and help when we need to. And I just think you have to sort of recognize, what you can bring in a situation like that when you're in over your head. You don't want to make more work for the rescuers. We don't need any more victims, right? And so I think you got to be real careful, getting into situations that are outside your wheelhouse. So I would just say if if this sort of thing it piques your interest or you want to learn, you want to know more, then fine. We could talk more later about how you might do that, but just go get trained, right? Like go get the training you need, and this is just another way for engineers to give back. So it is a great way to do that. I wouldn't do it outside of approved channels.
Yeah, I think that makes tons of sense. So we've kind of talked through getting training, and then, going out on some disasters. And once that immediate response is completed, once the structure is, the first responders, the firefighters are done and you guys have helped them with that. What does that documentation of things maybe look like? Like, how do you, let's say, tag the building saying, hey, this is the challenges, or, the second responders, as you mentioned, how do you bring them up to speed? What does that process look like?
That varies.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I would say there's
changing.
Yeah, there are FEMA standard markings. It's another thing you're taught. And it's, there are international markings, right? There are ways that can be recognized internationally for, hey, this building's been hastily searched. This building's been deliberately searched. It's clear, right? We found people, they've been rescued. And you can do that with simple, on the ground, you make do with what you can with spray paint, and there are ways to do that. I think probably this is more Scott's realm, just because, he's a technological genius in some cases, right? So there are just ways now that are coming out about being able to mark things digitally and be able to push that information up. The last few years has seen a much different route from STS were originally taught how to fill out paper forms and turn the paper forms in, and it's a lot of that's gone digital. So there's different ways to do it at this point.
Yeah, during Helene, we it got nicknamed Skittles. We have an app that allows us to actually real time tag them if we have internet service. If you don't have internet service, you can tag and save, and then when you get this Wi-Fi, you can upload them all. So you're given on Helene, we're given like whole squadrons or areas and given either addresses or roads or stuff, and you went door to door, and each house got skittled. You either got a green skittle for everything's happy, everybody's good. You got a yellow skittle for it's damaged. You got a red skittle for damaged building. And literally sometimes it's like I'm tagging a foundation. I have no idea where the house is, but here's the foundation. So when we're in the town of Hawk, North Carolina, wasn't much of a town left. There was literally foundations up and down the roads by the riverbanks, but that was all that was left. And so we were walking town and we're just red, 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 red. It goes quickly. And then, we come across a mobile home that's on the riverbank and we're like, oh, well, we got to go search it. So we start slogging down to the mud to get to the mobile home because it wasn't tagged yet. And you hear movement and you're out, you're like, am I hearing movement because somebody's in there? Am I hearing movement because there's a bear in there? So there's two of us almost always. So you're now looking at a real life situation of start hollering out and see if someone's going to respond or something runs away. And sometimes you get surprised and someone pops their head out and say, hey, how you doing? And you're like, okay, wasn't expecting a live person that's willing to talk to me.
Yeah. So you go from in those aspects, like you're the structural engineer trying to assess things, but also you are looking for life in a lot of times.
A lot of times, we're going door to door to make sure that if the people are there, and we noted that too in the search, is there's 3 people, they're sheltering in place, they're not moving. It's a yellow dot or a green dot, and they're perfectly happy staying there. We can't tell a person they're leaving. I mean, there was a house that had a masonry foundation or masonry basement, and the whole corner of the house was gone, and the house was just cantilevering out over the river at that point because the river moved, and there was a guy in the basement sweeping the mud out, and you're like, I wouldn't be in there, but I can't tell you not to be in there.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on like that, and you're going through. You run across people in like hospice that were without power, that are needing power and water, and it's like all I can do is call back to the main operations center to get somebody out here that can help you because I'm just identifying that you're here right now, and someone else is going to have to come back and see about either moving you to a shelter or getting what you can get. So it's a lot more different in the modern technology world because you can literally shoot by houses and tags faster with the digital without having to go up and spray paint stuff. And people don't want their houses spray painted. People don't want to, so, and they don't really, the plate for placard stickers didn't really come off either. Once you stuck them, they were kind of stuck there. Mm-hmm. So that data can then get talked to the cities, managers and stuff like that. And they can start assessing with their building departments what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So that it's a little bit cleaner and easier with the digital age.
Yeah. So out of curiosity with your, Scott, with you owning your own engineering firm, how do these things tie together? Just out of curiosity, like you go to a city, let's say just commercial buildings, you find there's a lot of buildings that need more help. How do you go from that hat of I'm a representative of the state to I'm here to help a specific building owner assess their building and help with a redesign? How does that work?
So when we're fully deployed, we're a state asset. I'm doing what the people tell me to do. I am not Colllins structural. I am literally, an STS. During like Hurricane Michael, I was regularly get called from our contractor saying, hey, we need you to come look at the shipyard building. And then I would fly down there to look at this particular building to help put it back. And then it would be, oh, since you're here, I got this school, this church, this. And then you're like running from building to building till you get to your airport time. And so Hurricane Michael was regularly going down for a building, getting 6 to 12 other buildings, and then running for a plane flight and catching that plane flight home. Sometimes, I don't think I ever missed one, but it was close, where I'm the last to get on the plane because I was literally looking at a structure right until running to the airport. So
it is different worlds, right? It's different world. You're not there to Scott's point. Like, I'm not there for Atlas. So
Right.
I don't bring any of my own stuff. I even have separate business cards that have my contact information that's not my company card. Like, I'm not there to do anything like that. I mean, I'm there for the rescuers, and I'm there for the scenario. Now, I will say, in the case of Helene, right, Scott and I both live in North Carolina. We both have engineering firms, so
Right.
once you've gone past all that, there have been projects that have come out on from the city of Asheville or the state where they need engineering support, and obviously at that point you could say you go after those jobs as if you would any other job. So there's a fairly, I've never had any trouble delineating. It's a pretty clear boundary.
Yeah. There was one scenario in Helene that was a questionable thing, if anything. During operations in Mitchell County, I got a call from one of the plants that makes most of the IV bags for the East, and they were hit hard with the flooding. And the engineer that was supposed to be looking at it couldn't look at it because for some reason. So they called me and said, "Can you come do this?" And I went up the chain and said, "Hey, I know this is not, quote, first responder world, but this is a necessity for the community. Do you want to release me for the time to get down to the plant to do what that needs to be done to get that plant up and running, and I'll come back?" And they were basically agreed to do that, and then something else. They managed to get the other engineer, a different engineer, there besides me, which made life easier. But I was telling him, like, look, that's may not be a state asset, but it's an asset that is impacts the entire state. So they were able to look at letting me go for a couple hours, but that ended up changing directions. So
yeah. I could see it being hard. Eventually, you're not. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. You run a business. You want to be an engineer to be helpful, and people are like, "Hey, you checked my building. It's not working. Can you also fix this?" And you're like, "I got two hats here. I want to say yes, but I'm also here for a different reason." So
usually most people don't ask us, "Can you fix it?" Since you're an engineer.
Yeah.
Most people are just happy that you're there. You're recognizing that needed help.
Right.
So and a lot of times you're not advertising, especially when you're going door to door. You're not saying, "Yeah, your house looks like crap. Let me go. I'll fix you." You're saying, "Are you okay? I know this sucks. Is there anything you need from me?" And I'm moving on to the next house, type scenario. So you're definitely not marketing your work at that point.
Well, and in most cases, they don't even know we're an engineer, right? I mean, we're wearing the same uniforms as everybody else, right? So they just see us as a first responder. And the only other thing that I was going to say, similar to Scott, I mean, Helene was a little bit of a different animal, right? So, I was asked to go look at all of the major bridges in Mitchell County, right? I don't know, that didn't have to do with the exact team. I mean, obviously the teams were going to use these bridges, right? So there was an element of, hey, the teams, could use this information, but it really was for the county, right? It was, hey, you're the only engineers out here. I have no idea if that bridge about 4 miles up the river is even there anymore. Can you guys go, evaluate it? Because we got to get supplies in here, right? So there are elements that you can bring in a situation like that where your engineering expertise is as long as there's a loose link to the fact that I'm helping these teams, which is what I'm there for. The bigger reason is, again, public safety. I'm there for the good of, in this case, the county. In Scott's case, hey, this may not impact the team that I'm on, but it certainly impacts this community, right? I think that's an appropriate use of what we're there for.
Yeah,
but you didn't get the railroad bridge. I had to go get that one. Thank you.
I'm curious with the bridges. You would think it, especially with a flood, they're going to lift up from their supports and maybe come back down. So you might come in and say they're good for now and need additional survey review
100%
discussion.
Yep.
How does that get documented so it actually happens? Like what does that process look like to make sure that the counties take it further? Is it again the different colors that get applied to it?
In our case, that's exactly what it was. It's funny.
Okay.
you mentioned that. So I gave a quick talk to some students at UNC Charlotte recently, and my title was, look, I'm not a bridge engineer, and I was forced to look at bridges, right? So, that's not my forte, and but I know enough to look at a bridge and understand. I've got a decent understanding of what should be there and what shouldn't be there, and so I was evaluating the easy ones. They looked great. The other easy ones was the bridge was gone, right? Okay, well, I can, because I saw multiples of those. Bridge is completely gone. To your point, it was lifted
Wow.
off and it didn't come back down on its foundations. It flipped over, right? So those are easy. Those are, it to Scott's point, the completely destroyed. I can mark that on the map. And then all the ones in between where, okay, I can mark this on the map. Here's what I saw. This needs to be, NCDOT needs to come back out and repair this bridge or further evaluate this bridge. For now, I think it's safe enough for travel. I think supplies can come in this way. The teams can use this route, but it certainly needs follow up. And that was, to Scott's point, we were in the digital age then, so all of that could be rolled up to the county level. The county would come up to the district level, and ultimately the entire state was gathering up all of that information. And that really set sort of the first stages of that second responders and the reconstruction that Scott mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sometimes you're on the wrong side of the water and you're the only engineer that can assess the dam.
Right.
So, because Klaus and I got that trip to go look at 2 earth dams in Laurenburg, because the Army Corps guys were on the wrong side of the water and they didn't have a system to get them there. So they're like, you're going to go look at these dams that may burst. It's like, okay, we're gone.
Wow. Has any of these disasters you've gone to changed any of the ways you see the building code or any of the ways you have engineered things, after that occurrence?
I feel that my critique of other engineers when I have to do a third-party review because owner or contractor asked me to review it, I feel like I'm a lot harder because I'm like, the code is the minimum that you need to meet. If you can't meet the minimum, then I get to go visit the building later in an event. And hopefully I'm just visiting your building to make sure no one's there and not have to dig somebody out.
Yeah.
So I tend to go, especially when I see something silly like an unbraced beam for an uplift condition that doesn't have any bracing on it. It's like, it seems like an 1835 works great for 40 feet on a roof beam. But then you're like, but there's an uplift and it's a real thing. And I've seen those things turn sideways and bend up as in the middle of a tornado or hurricane. So it's kind of like, hopefully most buildings that have that size beam is an industrial complex and you're not having people in it. So it's not a big deal, at least life safety wise. But it is a big deal when you're like, this is a serious miss in building code or engineering world.
I don't think I can say it any better than Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always thought you go see those things and you're probably thinking of how buildings act in a totally different way, right? We don't often design in those super critical scenarios where it's maybe beyond code or, like a building that's getting hit by a tornado that's not an ICC 500 shelter. Like that thing is going to act in a way that we don't anticipate. We maybe anticipate, but not how you would typically see buildings. So curious. So what advice would you give an engineer that wants to get involved in emergency response?
It starts off as a long process. So don't be in a rush. North Carolina requires you to have a PE and 5 years experience. So that's 10 years out of school to begin with. Then you got to be Cal OES certified, which is secondary responder type evaluations. You need to be SDS1, at least SPS2, preferably. A bunch of other online classes that you have to deal with. So, and then once you can get trained, it may be, another, year before you even set out something to somewhere. So it's not I'm going to go be a first responder and tomorrow I'm going to go rescue somebody out of the building. It's going to be, I got all this training and I get to train some more and I get to wait and I get to train some more. And then I got to go do this little thing and then I got to do that thing. And then I go sit at a hurricane and sit around doing nothing for most of the time. And then I'm out doing something. So there's a lot of patience involved between the chaos.
I would say if you're interested, there's not a lot of us, but we're scattered. And so, I'm sure you've got listeners across the country. The first step that North Carolina is a little bit unique. There are a few states that have their own assets within the state as state assets. There's a number of states that have state teams, and but there are some that don't. And then there are the federal teams, the FEMA teams, and each one of those teams, whether it's a state asset, and certainly the federal teams, in order to field 2 engineers on a federal team, you probably need 6, 7, or 8, on a bench, right? So you've got these teams scattered out there, and they all need engineers. And so if you're interested, my suggestion to folks is find the closest team to you, whether that's a state team or a federal team. Reach out, try to work your way around, find somebody who knows somebody who knows. Oh yeah, I know. One of the engineers on that team. Contact them; they'll be able to point you in the right direction. Yeah, we're looking. Hey, we got some slots. This is what it would take. I would. Every little team is a little different. And so I would just say, if you're interested, find the team that's closest to you. Ask a lot of questions. This is not something that this isn't a hobby, right? So it's not just something you're going to pick up and be like, that was cool, but I don't want to do that anymore. Like you actually, this is a commitment that it's going to take, as Scott said, it's going to take a couple of years to get you fully up and ready. So I wouldn't make that decision lightly. And but if you're interested, reach out, because we always need new engineers on these teams, and it can be very fulfilling and rewarding, and it's another way to get back. And so if your interest is sparked at all, that's just the first step is reaching out. And honestly, Scott and I can be resources for folks as well. As if they hear this and you want to give them our contact information, we can also point people in the right direction and answer any additional questions. So that's what I would say, is just gather as much information as you can. Talk to your family, because it's got an effect on them when hey, I know this hurricane's about to hit. I just got the call, so I'm going to pack up my bags and I'm going to go. You got this at home, right? So there's an element of that. Or hey, I got the call and I'm leaving and I don't know when I'm coming back, right? So there's a lot of aspects of it that shouldn't be taken lightly. And as long as you have all the information, I think if you're still interested, then I would just say it's worth it.
Now, my final question kind of went through all the questions that Max and I came up with. What questions have we not asked that would be really important to discuss with our listeners, or to have, to mention here? And Mike, let's start with you.
Oh, you had to put me on the spot first. Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. You sent out a couple of questions ahead of time, and we did touch on it, though. The one that just it always comes to mind, and I'm always kind of it's a topic I'd like to think about in this realm is, and Scott mentioned it already, is sort of that risk reward. Like, how do you balance? What engineers we love to double underline. This is the answer. That is not the case here. That will not happen. You won't ever get it. You won't have that satisfaction. And so, I think there's a mindset. And so maybe that's the question, is like, what sort of mindset do you have to do this sort of work? And I think you've got to be okay in chaotic situations, and you've got to be okay with making quick judgment calls without all the answers. And you've got to be okay with the fact that you're not really going to know whether or not that building is safe. It's not safe. If it was safe, we wouldn't be here, right? So, I think the mindset shift, we are taught one way when you become a degreed engineer. And so it takes a little bit of a different shift, a paradigm shift. You've got to accept, that risk reward scale that Scott mentioned is critical. And so I think, and I say all of that to say that you can gain that mindset, right? You can be taught that mindset. You can learn from others, the experiences that you have, you can get there, but it can be a shock initially. to folks that are so used to concrete, clear. I have a building code and I'm going to follow it. That's not, hey, I hear you. That that none of that matters right now. In this situation, it's a whole different ball game.
I
All
guess
right,
the
Scott,
question
how about you?
the question I would probably ask or would lead to is, you know, I think in your earlier episodes you said there's about 60,000 structural engineers in the United States. There's about 300 STSs. So
Wow.
almost everyone has learned to check their ego, their I'm the most important person or I'm the coolest thing in the office at the door, and realize that this world is humbling you. As Mike said, you don't have the answers. You're not going to get the definitive answer. You have no at the end modeling time. You have 5 seconds before the firefighters are going to do something. You got to make a decision and you're going to have to live with it. And hopefully it's through experience and knowledge, you're willing to make that decision quickly and safely for the firefighter. So it's a lot different. And you got to realize that you're not the sharpest tool in the room. You're not the smartest kid on the street. And sometimes you're going to have to say, hey, this is not my building type. I am not comfortable building, industrial complexes or, schools or whatever it is you're facing at that moment. So you got to realize I got to check my ego. There's somebody else on the team that is that expert and I can lean on them to fill in the voids that I don't know. So it's in a weird world to realize that I am taking, literally in my case, a competitor, one of the other companies that compete in the same markets of the pharmaceutical world with me, their principal or lead engineer is on the team with me. So yeah, we actually compete on jobs regularly, but we also know that our market's so small that he calls me up and says, hey, do you have drawings for this building? And I go, hey, yeah, here you go. So we'll share stuff when we learn that works not only in the first responder world, but in the rest of the world, is that there are people we can lean on, we can ask questions to. And that's very important to recognize that.
Yeah, I've always thought that and shared that with other structural engineers that, I think at some point in the day we have to compete, but after that we have to make sure that life safety is maintained, right? And making sure that you can call each other and ask a question or, hey, have you ever ran into this scenario or condition and kind of, you also need to help each other because there is not a lot of structural engineers, let alone the 300 you've mentioned that, help in this. So doing things together to make sure that we have a safe society, our buildings are safe is such a more important thing than fighting each other over projects probably. Well, Mike, Scott, thank you guys so much both for being on the podcast with Max and I, and we've certainly learned a lot.
You're welcome.
No, thank you. This was great. I like to get out and I do some of the recruiting efforts here in the state and do other talks. So this is great. Just getting the word out. Again, I would just echo if folks are at all interested, feel free to reach out to Scott or I, and we can point you in the right direction. So, I just appreciate you giving us the opportunity to chat. It's something I think Scott and I are both passionate about. So it was a pleasure, and I certainly appreciated it.
Certainly, we'll have both your guys' contact information in the show notes below.